founders are people who are generally very passionate and dedicated to what they're doing. And that keeps me going. Dealing with people like that keeps me going. There's just, I enjoy facilitating that kind of person in achieving their goals. That's always in me.
Welcome to 20-Minute Leaders. Just sit back, relax, and learn from the leaders of today. It's a journey. Each one is different, unique, inspiring. Let's get started. This episode is powered by J Ventures, a community-driven VC fund in Silicon Valley in partnership with Leumitech, sponsored by Homeward Ventures, Hippo Insurance, Upwest Labs, Synergy Global, Hillel at Stanford, Leap, Birthright Excel, Serona Partners, and in media partnership with CTech. Welcome to another episode of 20-Minute Leaders. Today, I have with me David Siegel, co-founder of Solvd4. David is the co-founder of startup dispute mediation platform Solvd4 and a partner at Grellas Shah. David is an unusual startup lawyer in having done sophisticated legal work in both transactional and litigation matters. He is an accomplished startup lawyer and litigator who has extensive experience in handling a broad range of corporate, transactional, and intellectual property matters, including work on multi-million-dollar financing and acquisitions, all in addition to having a deep expertise in handling complex intellectual property, corporate, and commercial litigation matters. David Siegel, welcome to 20-Minute Leaders all the way from California. How are you today?
I'm great. Thank you for having me.
Thank you very, very much for taking the time out of your busy schedule to speak with me. A little bit about, what it's like being a partner at Grellas Shah, and a little bit about your own journey, the founder's mentality, your way of partnering with the founders as they navigate through this really complicated and convoluted world. And it's a crazy time to be an entrepreneur and to be alive, and you're seeing, all the crazy pieces of it. And so, David, tell me a little bit about yourself and a little bit about your journey.
Yeah, sure. So I have been a lawyer for not quite 20 years, but I didn't start out in the startup world at all. I started out in New York. I grew up in New York and kind of always knew I wanted to be a lawyer, but thought that meant go into the courtroom type lawyer, which is how I started. I started at a large law firm in New York, and I was litigating, big bet the company type cases. And it was interesting, but does not match my personality at all. I'm not a combative person. I'm assertive, but not aggressive. And I like to bring people together, not... I don't want to say, litigators don't tear people apart, good ones, but they're fighters more than, uniters. And I'm more of a uniter type person. So, I became interested in the startup world while I was still in New York, and decided to move out to California, both for family and to kind of pursue that side of things. I left my big law firm job, perhaps at the wrong time, because it was in the middle of the '08 recession.
Wow!
But it actually worked out very well. I ended up getting a job in something totally different and trying something new, and worked at a nonprofit for a while, which I loved. But I made my way back to the law, which was not a shocker for me, and got hooked up with the law firm I'm at right now, which is Grellas Shah, and our founding partner George Grellas is well known in the legal startup world, so he was a great mentor to have, and still to have. And so from there, I've been at Grellas Shah for over 10 years, working with startups and founders and trying to help them succeed and protect their rights, which is what I've been doing, and I'm loving it.
So let's dive deep a little bit into the relationship between a founding team or entrepreneurs and the law firm that represents them, this partnership. Because I think from the outside, one can, intuitively just assume that this relationship starts and ends at, various funding rounds, various legal contracts between employees, and later on, perhaps an acquisition or potentially an IPO. How is this relationship actually managed, and how early does it start?
How early does it start, or how early should it start, are two very different questions. I mean, I understand why they diverge. So, you're a student, or you're working at Apple, Facebook, whatever company you're at. You have an idea, and the idea going from an idea to a company is not an overnight thing, and it's not clear when that's going to happen. So, uh, you know, founders often kind of tinker around with something before they know if it's serious or not. And then when they kind of get serious about it, they aren't prioritizing legal things that often seem to be secondary to building a product and seeing where it would go. Um, my recommendation is always to see a lawyer as soon as possible, because um, lawyers in this industry spend an unfortunate amount of time cleaning up the issues of not buttoning up the legal side of things early, which a lot of them can be buttoned up through online platforms. You don't necessarily need a lawyer for much at the beginning if you're doing kind of standard things. But if you do nothing at the very beginning, you could end up in situations where people disagree with what the setup should be, and then you've created a bunch of IP and who owns it, and unclear about who's going to own what in the company, and that can cause problems.
What would that first meeting look like between? What would that first meeting look like between you and a founder? Let's say I'm coming to you and I'm saying, "Listen, me and my two friends here, we're working on this thing.
Mm-hmm.
Nice to meet you." How does this first meeting go?
Yeah. So the first things first is getting an understanding of what it is that these people are doing. What's the product? What's the market? What they're thinking about, to get a sense of the track that the company is on, some early thoughts of some legal issues they need to think about if they're going to run into regulatory issues, if there's IP issues at the outset that they need to be concerned about, particularly if they're working in another company, or still in school, or are there issues with them even owning the IP they're working on, and then get a sense of where they think their trajectory is. It's not necessarily a fair assumption that everyone is looking for traditional VC funding, for example, or if they want to keep their options open for different types of ways of growing their business, and that leads to recommendations on what their kind of corporate setup would be, and what's market, what's not, and how much market necessarily matters, and what's important to them going forward.
Right. So in your relationship with founders, is it mainly a one in which the founders come, they give you an update on what's happening, and then you help facilitate from a legal perspective what's happening? Or do you find yourself also sort of intertwined with the decision-making process, the brainstorming, the rationale behind what decisions should be made and when?
That is very dependent on the client. There are clients I have who come from time to time, and it's transactional in the sense that there's discrete things they want me to do. And there are clients who text me all the time, and we have calls about things that are barely legal. Wow. It really depends. I mean, and on one side, lawyers who do what I do have a lot of repeat experience in ways that can help, that are beyond purely legal. But everyone has the people you need to work with, people you trust and trust for certain things, and different people have different people they rely on for different types of decision making. I don't begrudge people either way.
Where are you on the spectrum? So what you've decided you've had quite an interesting journey throughout your career. You decided to go back and now with Grellas Shah, represent founders and work with these founding teams. What is it about this experience that you enjoy most?
There are two sides. There's not one answer. On one hand, I did not. I thought I'd be more interested when I went into this in the pure tech side of things, and it's interesting. That side's interesting, but that's not my motivator for staying in this. Founders are people who are generally very passionate and dedicated to what they're doing, and that keeps me going. Dealing with people like that keeps me going. There's just I enjoy facilitating that kind of person in achieving their goals. That's always been me. On the other side, there's the more I don't know how best to put this, but the being a lawyer in this industry allows me, in a way that's consonant with my personality, it's not fighting in court, to exercise a part of my brain that I enjoy exercising, which is the analytical part of things. And being able to do that while achieving goals that I like to achieve is, all I could ask for in a career.
I love that. So David, as a young entrepreneur, sitting now for the first meeting, what are some things that you've been observing from your experiences that I should, be cognizant of? Things that are perhaps non-trivial in the founder's journey as I'm navigating this complicated world with a lot of moving pieces. What are some things that I should be, keeping in mind as I go on my journey?
The first one is founders have a lot of resources and advice out there. And a lot of it is smart. A good amount of it, though not nearly all, is well-meaning, but rarely is it not loaded in the sense of people having their own interests. And that comes in all sorts of ways. The most notable is going to be, investors, potential investors who tend to court founders in a mentory advisory role when, until they're on your cap table and funded, it's not a zero-sum relationship, but it's closer to a zero-sum relationship than founders tend to believe. So you have to take the advice you're getting with a grain of salt, and that comes from every side. I mean, the investors being maybe the biggest, but it's an unfortunate fact that a lot of there's an ecosystem around the founder startup world that's filled with players that are there to give you advice for usually equity, and you just have to be careful about whose advice you're taking and how much you believe it.
Right. But then what skills do we have to gauge that? How do we know whether this person either is qualified or whether, all the intentions are aligned with the right incentives and this is the best partner for us to work with?
Sure. A couple of things. One is, do your own due diligence on the people whose advice you're taking. Investors are going to do diligence on you. You should do due diligence on them. And then I think founders are pretty, generally capable of taking a step back and trying to figure out what the motivations might be behind someone's advice. So, when you're talking, there are professional advisors like lawyers and, accountants who have legal duties to, fiduciary duties to you, which is helpful. But then, you also have to be somewhat, I don't want to be too much of a skeptic, but you have to be careful about the advice you're taking in the sense that, I think lawyers are generally trying to give you good advice, and so are accountants. But, if their advice is something that's going to cost you a lot of money, take a step back and try to figure out if, do you really need that or not? But in general, doing your diligence and talking to other founders about who they've dealt with. If you're trying to hire some company to be a sales partner of some sort, and they're, find out who else has worked with them. There are lots of ways of connecting with other founders who are usually the best source of this kind of advice, because they tend to be very helpful and they usually don't have much to gain.
Right. Now, if you're looking at yourself, as a part of this whole prism and this whole complicated network, why are you in this? Why back in New York, you say, I'm going to go to California, both for family, but also because I want to be part of the startup scene. You're in Silicon Valley. It's a very hectic world. I'm sure that, sometimes you have days that you start them out knowing one thing, you're ending them in a completely different place with crazy experiences. What is it about you that really gets you going?
Well, I should be honest, having lived for years in Manhattan as a lawyer at a big firm, I saw and still to an extent see my life here as being a step back in terms of being more calm.
I can imagine.
So the hectic nature of it doesn't. I mean, days like that, which are most of my days, go very quickly. That doesn't faze me particularly at all. And I deal with a lot of people every day who are doing important and exciting things, and yes, that makes my life hectic, but it makes my life interesting, and I don't particularly want to be able to predict how my day is going to end based on how it begins. Wow. I think, and that's what keeps me going.
But what do you have to do then on a personal level to be able to be open to that? I mean, because when I imagined the work of a lawyer, I imagined pretty strict schedules. You're very on top of things. Everything's very orderly, and all of a sudden, how are you able to sort of train yourself and set your own work environment so that you are adaptive to these urgent situations that may come in and may require you to just shift your priorities within minutes?
So I can't do that alone. And I'm not a solo practitioner, and I wouldn't work as a solo practitioner. I'm not quite that hyper organized person. But I am a person who knows how to work well with others who can help complement the sides of me that are maybe not my biggest strengths. So I know how to work with people to make sure the things that need to be organized file wise and calendar wise and all that stuff keeps getting done while I do the part that I do best. It's just It's a team effort.
Right, and so just it's a team effort for internally within Grellas Shah. It's also a team effort with the partners that you choose to partner with, which are the entrepreneurs. I'm guessing they don't have to just choose you; you have to choose them. What entrepreneurs do you enjoy working most with? What are sort of their personalities like?
Sure. I mean, there's kind of a spectrum that I enjoy working with. There isn't one type. I mostly enjoy working with people who are there. Legal does not need to be and shouldn't be the most important thing on your list, but it shouldn't be something that you don't see any importance in. So if it's someone who's going to take my advice and role seriously, then chances are it's going to work quite well. People tend to, for good or bad, see me, characterize me as a consigliere type personality, or playing that kind of role. So I do enjoy working with clients and that kind of, reach out to me at any time and, want to, pick my brain on things. It's not the exclusive way I work, and it probably wouldn't work if every client was that way. But, when we can create a relationship like that, that's something that I do enjoy as being a part of the client base I work with. But it's not necessarily just one type.
Right. I gathered that, but and then I think what I what I really gain inspiration from this conversation is this idea of the teamwork that goes on here, and this idea of partnership, that it's not simply that there are the more transactional relationships, but really where founders, especially in their early stages, can get the most value. It's from gaining that insight that you're bringing with you, from seeing many, many experiences, understanding who has aligned incentives and what are the different stakeholders that are here, and sort of navigating through this complicated web. And David, I really want to thank you for spending this time with me and for the great work that you're doing with Grellas Shah. It was really inspirational for me as a young entrepreneur, and really just thank you.
Absolutely. Happy to do it.
I really appreciate it. Thank you.